Welcome back. The new White House cybersecurity executive order requires agencies to take specific actions and meet hard deadlines. The vendors that serve government will have new rules to follow, too, as a result of the EO. Eric Crusius is senior counsel at Holland Knight. Eric, welcome. It's good to see you again. What difference does this make for the vendors that serve the government?
It makes a pretty big difference. I mean, as of now, there aren't any new rules on the vendors. The executive order lays out a plan of new rules to kind of become implemented. I remember about 7 to 10 years ago, I was speaking at the National Contract Management Association's annual conference, and I said, there's a cybersecurity tsunami coming. So be careful, don't get swept away. And I think what's going to happen as this executive order rolls out is that a lot of companies who are not willing to be compliant or are not compliant are going to get swept away because the government's just no longer going to want to do business with them. So I think even though there's not a requirement that's there right now, contractors should really pay close attention, because there are a lot of new things that they'll have to do, such as disclosing breaches, keeping track of the software that they're using. There's a whole long laundry list of things that they'll have to do.
What are some of the most important things that you have a sense that they'll have to do in the future that maybe they're not doing or not doing enough of now?
I think part of this kind of centers on what is critical software. So certain contractors who use software that the government will be deemed critical are, for lack of a better term, will have to kind of pay attention to what's going on with that software. For instance, there is a reading of the EO where a contractor who's using a popular word processing program, if that word processing program has some kind of security incident that's unrelated to the contractor, maybe in a far off land somewhere else, the contractor may have to bring that information to the government. So it might be, the onus may be on the contractors to kind of understand what's happening with all the software that they're using, if that software is kind of deemed critical software. So there's a lot of nuance like that, where a lot of it's going to kind of be hammered out in the regulatory process that's going to happen over the next 6 to 12 months. But you'll see contractors who have not had requirements because they're civilian contractors and they do a lot of commercial work. All of a sudden, are going to be hit with these new cybersecurity requirements that they haven't seen coming and come out of left field.
You used a phrase there a moment ago, Eric, that I think is interesting, a reading of the EO, and then you made a reference. Does that mean that the EO, or at least parts of it, are open to interpretation and maybe aren't as clear as vendors would like it to be?
Yes, and I don't think that's unusual, but it's unfortunately what happens, because the folks who in the White House are going to leave it to the regulatory agencies to kind of nail down the details. And which way those details go can really have a huge impact on how this EO goes. So for instance, I go back to the definition of critical software. You could see a reading of the EO where critical software really means just about any piece of software a user uses or buys. And that includes ubiquitous programs that we all have on our computers. You could see another reading of critical software that's very specific, that's only to really highly technical projects. How the Bar Council will write that definition really will impact probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of contractors and what they'll have to do. So the EO, unfortunately, is not very specific, but I think that's just how it works, where the White House just kind of leaves it to the experts to kind of figure that out.
So how do you as a company plan for that ahead of time while still sitting there thinking, well, we want to continue to serve and help our customers figure out what this all means and figure out what they need to do too?
For a company, I think the best thing to do is kind of prepare for, for lack of a better term, the worst case scenario, or the most regulatory heavy scenario for that company. And just kind of understand what the EO says, what that worst case interpretation is. And I'm not saying worse like it's bad to have cybersecurity controls, just worse that it's going to be additional regulations that they'll have to pay for and comply with. But look at that worst case scenario and kind of understand what it is, and then game plan that out. If I have to do X, what does that mean from a regulatory perspective? How do I prepare for that? And not spend a ton of money getting prepared, but at least kind of understand the process to be prepared for that. So when those proposed regs come out and those final regs come out, that company is ready to go. Because if they're not, the government's just not going to do business with them anymore.
We have a little bit more than a minute left, Eric. What will you watch moving forward?
So this executive order has dozens of directives for agencies to do things. And what I'll be looking for is how quickly are those directives rolling out? Oftentimes we get executive orders with deadlines. Those deadlines push and push and push. And 7 years later, we don't have a regulation. I can't imagine that's going to happen here, but I'm going to watch how this cascades and see if the first few deadlines are met, and that will give a good sense of how quickly this process is going to go.
20 seconds. What happens after that? What do you think companies will have to do next?
I think companies will have to be ready for an entire new world of cybersecurity compliance, not just folks in the DoD space, but folks in the civilian space. You lay that on top of CMMC, and cybersecurity is probably the top regulatory requirement that contractors have to think about right now.
Eric Crusius, thanks very much. As always, great to see you.
Thank you.